Hello, my name is Jeremiah Telemontis, and welcome to the REDTEAMOPSEC podcast, where we talk all about physical red teaming, social engineering, and penetration testing. This podcast is supported by RedTeam Security Training, a premier provider of live, instructor-led, online, pre-recorded, and classroom-based training on physical red teaming and social engineering. Visit redteamsecuritytraining.com for more information. If you haven't checked out episode 3, please take a moment to do that soon. Episode 3 is our first time taking a stab at reenacting one of my many social engineering engagements. It has music, it has sound effects. The engagement goes a little haywire, of course. It's all good fun, though. So it's definitely one of my favorite ones to tell. Do check it out if you have the time. So thank you for taking the time to listen in today, and welcome to episode 4 of this podcast. I got to admit, I'm a little surprised that some of you still stick around. With the exception of the war story episodes, I do record these in one take. So that means like the intro, like that, and all these other cool things. I don't edit them in, nor do I edit them out. Like the verbal flubs or the times that I lose my train of thought. For me, it makes it all a little bit more real. And I sincerely thank you guys for still taking the time to listen in, despite not having a super produced show. Anyway, enough of that. In this episode, I'd like to introduce the REDTEAMOPSEC framework, right? The REDTEAMOPSEC framework is a methodology I created for others like me who are tasked with testing the physical security of facilities in a consistent and repeatable, comprehensive, and efficient way. So if that's something you're interested in, please stick around. So today we have, OWASP, PTES, the penetration testing execution standard. We've got CWE, we've got all things, the cyber kill chain. But here we are in 2020, and there's still no framework for testing physical security. So when I talk about, the REDTEAMOPSEC methodology and framework, this is my primary goal in the development of the framework. It's ideal for consulting companies, is where my background primarily came from. State, federal governments, the private sector, of course, universities, and really any org for that matter. Of course, the key point there is how to apply the framework in a realistic and commensurate way. I'll say that again because it definitely bears repeating. The key point is how to apply the REDTEAMOPSEC framework so that it's carried out, TTPs, in a realistic and commensurate way, using the same level of sophistication that a likely bad actor would leverage. Right? So that is something that I intend on covering in a later episode. But for now, as I mentioned, let's dive into the framework. Okay, ready? Here we go. So my objective for kind of developing the REDTEAMOPSEC framework was because, as I mentioned before, no other framework existed or is in existence today. It does have many military influences, but it's something that I believe is very comprehensive. Try to be all-encompassing, and probably most importantly, one of the struggles that I had early on in my career was trying to come up with a repeatable and consistent way to, test these organizations comprehensively and produce a work product, because I was in consulting at the time, and really kind of try and deliver something of value. Doing this multiple times over several organizations, and it was really difficult. So a lot of the work came out of my experiences at RedTeam Security. REDTEAMOPSEC is kind of made up of these 12 steps. And we'll dig into the first one, which is titled the rules of engagement. Okay, so the rules of engagement really kind of identifies the targets, the date ranges, the stakeholders. It establishes these guidelines for the operation. And I think, this is a borrowed military term as well, but it really kind of establishes how the operation is going to occur, specifically calling out of scope areas, out of scope TTPs, which it might be like damage to property and things of that nature. But more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but in addition to, it establishes lines of communication. That's how the team is going to communicate with the client. The client being either an actual client, for example, if this is for a consulting company, or intercompany communication, that is the team dealing with their managers and stakeholders as a result of the engagement. So in a nutshell, that is really what the rules of engagement are really all about. Step number 2 is reconnaissance. So engage in recon. This, I like to say, is the most time-intensive aspect of the entire methodology. I think we all know that anytime we're doing reconnaissance, it's just a wide swath of things that could come up. It's online work, it's physical reconnaissance as well. More importantly, we're not just doing Facebook and Google searches and Google Earth, but we're also on the ground doing long range and short range reconnaissance. And I've got a couple. I've got some training, and I've got 2 shortcuts for those that have never really done any sort of reconnaissance. I like to break it down into a couple of shortcuts. I call Recon C3, which is basically just an easy way to understand how reconnaissance is carried out. That's contact, conceal, and capture. And then as a part of the capture aspect, I have what I call the EDECE method, which is EDECE. Again, another acronym. But really important to kind of recall, easy to recall. EDECE really kind of stands for the establish a rally point. The D is deploy team. The E again is engage the target. C is capture the intel, and then E is exit to the rally point. Again, really important, kind of shortcuts to kind of help folks if this is their first time doing this kind of thing, and it's a good way to kind of recall and understand a little bit more about reconnaissance. Clearly, there's a lot more than the bullet points that I just mentioned, but that is step 2 in the process. Moving on to step 3, we have direct preparations. And really this step is really about reviewing the reconnaissance data that was observed and recorded in the previous step, conducting a vulnerability analysis. So just like how we do in the pen testing world, after we do our vulnerability scans, for example, port scanning, we're tasked with the step of conducting the analysis on those. What's worthwhile? What's a false positive? What's worthwhile to continue testing? Right. So this is a very important step under the direct preparations, number 3. This is the part we also do resource planning. We identify tools. Again, very similar to the pen testing world. And then one aspect is the team, kind of building out the team. What's the team going to look like? How many people do we need? Do we have a need for bypassing, motion sensors? Who's really good at that? What about lock picking? We have some highly secure locks that we need folks with those kind of specialties. So really, it's kind of building out the team and planning those resources. And then finally, one of the work products that comes out of direct preparations is the operational plan development and delivery. So this is kind of a plan that you share with clients. stakeholders, kind of outline a rough plan of how the engagement is going to how it's going to be carried out. The next one is trigger mobilization. So this is we're talking about entirely in the physical realm. So where is the team going to set up? And we call this staging. Staging is a place where a physical place, physical location, somewhat near the target. So if you've got a data center, this is going to be some place where it's close enough to the data center, aka the target, but not too far away. There's some other aspects of how some criteria defining what makes a good staging selection, but in a sense, we're setting this we're setting the setup site, and then kind of defining, where the deployment part is going to be. So the deployment point is a location, usually near the location, the target, that is where the team actually deploys from. Sometimes they're the same, staging and deployment, but oftentimes they're two separate locations. For example, if it's a data center, you may consider dropping someone off, let's say by pulling over and letting them outside the vehicle. There's so many variations of that, but we select a deployment point at this stage as well. And then finally, once they're done with the boots on the ground sort of recon, then we got to define a place to kind of scoop them up. This is what we call a rally point. A rally point is, again, used later in the methodology, but this is specific to reconnaissance. So this is where the team, once everything is done, when they've achieved their reconnaissance goals, then the team will mobilize to this location. The next one is execute staging, step 5. This is where we've identified the location, right? Where the team is going to be staging. Now we've actually moved there. The team is now actually setting up, getting things checked, getting ready to actually go out into the field. They're doing equipment checks. More importantly, communications checks. How is the team how are they going to communicate with each other during the engagement, right? We've moved past reconnaissance. Now we're actually talking about going into the field and carrying out, executing the engagement. So got to make sure that the equipment we identified back in step 3 is in operational order, right? If we're using RFID or if we're using other tools on the cyber side, are they working? Are the batteries charged? All kinds of things that, again, all those things depend on what the nature of the engagement is. But this is where we would do our testing so that we know once we've reached the threshold and we're somehow getting inside the target facility, that we're able to carry out what we're supposed to be doing and that our equipment is in operational order. Sometimes this includes clothing changes. Oftentimes my team would go in at night, for example, and infiltrate the location during the cover of night. So sometimes it would involve just wearing dark colored clothing and things of that nature. So this is that step where you would make sure that those things are carried out as well. And I mentioned comms check, right? That's very important. Oftentimes my team would use radios, and we just want to make sure that do a radio check to make sure we can hear each other. Or oftentimes we would use merely a conference call, right? Like Zoom. We'd all jump on a conference call and have our Bluetooth earpieces in, and we would be able to kind of communicate that way, right? Have our smartphone in our pocket or one of our pouches, and be able to communicate through there. There are many different ways to kind of communicate, depending upon how you want to carry that out. But there's a lot to this as well, and I do cover more of this in my book, clearly. But again, communications check is very important. The other step that needs to happen here is a red team leader who is usually more of a senior person, or the person who's kind of like a project lead, but in the field. He or she would need to confirm that everyone, all the team members, are understand what the goals are, the objectives are. We call this mission goals, but understanding what once the team makes it, inside, do they know all of the security controls that should be testing in the appropriate ways and in compliance with the rules of engagement? And that step needs to happen there just to make sure there's no confusion. And then what actually happens shortly after that is you leave the location, right? So you actually make your way from the staging point where you've been setting up and, do what we call deployment into the field, or walking your way to the actual facility that you're going to be testing. So I'm going to take a short break. We'll be right back. The REDTEAMOPSEC podcast is sponsored by RedTeam Security Training. RedTeam Security Training specializes in delivering online and classroom training in physical red teaming, social engineering, and penetration testing. Visit redteamsecuritytraining.com and use the coupon code PODCAST1 to take 10% off the physical red team operations bundle. Okay, so moving on to step 6. As we were making, right, so where we last left off, we were executing, the execute staging step, where we're, actually moving, boots on the ground, making, advancing toward our target data center. Let's just go with that example. Number 6 is assess and acclimate. So at this point in time, we had done some reconnaissance back in step 2, and, some time may have passed. It could have been a couple of days. It could have been a couple of weeks, and maybe even a month or two since we last did our recon, right? And so we're expecting things to be in place. For example, let's say we did recon a month ago, right? Step 2 happened a month ago, and we expect there to be a vulnerability here. But things change, right? Environments, just like in IT, environments changed almost constantly. Physical environment changes. We may not know, right? So we need to do this eyes-on assessment of any changes that happen since our recon. Now, of course, the smaller the window between this point and the time that recon was conducted, probably the likelihood of change, any dramatic changes is probably pretty low. But this is an important step. Oftentimes this can be a very quick step, but this does happen. Just making sure that the vulnerabilities that were identified, the environment is still the same. And in those situations where there are changes, at that point in time, an assessment needs to happen. Okay, so X changed. Does X does it pose a risk to what our objectives are? How and to what magnitude does it change? Right. So at this point in time, it's very important to decide how the team is going to move forward. So decisions could be decide to abort. It could be to acclimate, which often happens, and then in advance. So when these changes happen, and I will say that my team has experienced changes. If I could put a percentage on it, I would say maybe a little less than half the time, and maybe that's due to our process. Our process was to conduct recon. So we'd fly out the location, spend a few days, usually 2-3 days, sometimes 4 days, to conduct a recon on site. And then we would fly back to our, back to Minneapolis, St. Paul, do our analysis, discuss, come up with a plan, build tools, acquire tools, and then we would fly back out to the location. So there's always some time in there. And oftentimes it was, at least a week or a couple of weeks, but it's been longer than that. So the chances and the likelihood for the environment to change physically, there's an opportunity for that. So, again, so it really comes down to deciding how to approach. Is the change so significant that maybe they've remediated the vulnerability? Maybe it was a I don't know, a poorly hung door, an opportunity to use the under the door tool. Maybe there wasn't sufficient lighting, all kinds of things, right? So maybe they've, in the meantime, have decided to really remediate outside of what you're knowledgeable of. And in that situation, you probably have to change on the fly. Other times it's, acclimate, right? So the other part of that, which is usually what the case was, is just, okay, so this has changed. Let's acclimate to this. This involves communications back to the red team leader to say, this vulnerability X, this poorly hung door, which I thought either I could use the under the door tool or maybe I could use a shove-it knife to get in. This is not possible anymore. Let's figure out what else to do. And that process, unfortunately, if it does happen, can be a pretty big stressor on the mission as a whole. But that's something that you tend to learn as you do more and more of these, is how, what would a likely attacker do using the level of sophistication or the tools, the TTPs, and adapt and proceed. So there's a lot of stuff on that one in my book, the Physical Red Team Operations, and some of the training I do. There's quite a process that needs to go on there to ultimately decide what to do to move forward. The next one is maneuver operations. This is really identifying, environmental conditions. This is, how do we actually, how do we make our way? How do we carry ourselves? What are the things that we need to be cognizant of in the environment? This could be, like I said before, environmental conditions. This is the settlement being urban versus rural, semi-urban, semi-rural, all kinds of aspects and nuances. And I could talk for days on that, but there's a lot of things specific to the settlement itself. Obviously, you have environmental conditions that may cause how you maneuver the team to the target, could impact that. If it's obviously if it's urban, it's probably less. But if it's rural, or in some data centers that we've infiltrated, being out sort of in the middle of nowhere, or being in desert-like conditions, rocky, hilly terrain, those things need to be taken into consideration. Not all targets are, in a downtown location. So, and then we talk about a little bit about situational awareness and observation. So taking into account being a little bit more hyper aware of your surroundings, not just the team, but what's in front of you, what's behind you, what's to the side of you, observing, listening to any potential noises, any potential folks coming into, that could be guards. It could be neighbors. It could be a barking dog, right? So observing what could impact what you're doing and kind of tuning those out and tuning in to the headlights or to a car approaching, right? So it's understanding how to take that information in, quickly do what we call an OODA loop. And some of you may have heard of that before. It's OODA, an OODA loop, just trying to understand how how to read your environment and how to react towards it. I talk more about that in a book, but if you want to Google that, it's OODA. Just trying to react appropriately and in the best interest of the mission moving forward. And then lastly, as a part of the maneuver operations, we have team movement. So this is really, a lot of this is communications. So the comms part of it. Are you using, Bluetooth earpieces with on a conference call, which is common to what we've done in the past? Or are you using, handheld radios to communicate? Just sort of communicating with each other, what you're seeing, what could be a potential risk, how you're moving. Oftentimes, if you have a larger team, it may involve, and it usually does, mean splitting up. So you don't have the nicety of seeing your team members. They're off to one side, or maybe they're in a certain part of the building facility that you just don't see. So coordinating that is very, very important, specific to communication. The next one we talk about is number 8, which is offensive strike. This is all about exploitation. That's really it. So you've identified the vulnerabilities way back in, when we're doing reconnaissance, and we've assessed the environment to make sure that, hey, yeah, it looks like they're still there. That door, I'm pretty sure that it's vulnerable to being shimmed with the shove it tool. This is where I actually carry that out, right? So if this is a pen test, technical pen test, this would be me, using Metasploit to exploit that vulnerability, right? So I'm exploiting, I'm trying to get a shell. This is what offensive strike is all about. So all the vulnerabilities that were identified earlier, this is where all that stuff happens. So I'm shimming, I'm using the under the door tool, I am bypassing motion detectors, I'm doing all those things, picking locks, all that stuff. The next one is penetrate and control. This is really kind of establishing a beachhead, establishing a position within the facility. So we've exploited the door at this point in time. We've gotten inside. Now what do we do? Well, now we make our way inside. We've officially penetrated the facility. We're establishing a position inside the facility. Oftentimes, when we make our way into a target, we don't know what's around the corner. The lights are usually off. We can't see anything. Don't want to bump into anything. Maybe it's a warehouse. Maybe it's an office. Who knows? We need to establish our bearings. If the building is potentially occupied, if we don't know if it's occupied, if we know that it will be occupied, sometimes this means that we need to change clothes. So as we were making our way to the facility, perhaps we were wearing dark clothing. Now, if there's a chance we'll be seen, if there's a chance that there's people still working at late hours of the night, which is typically when we infiltrate a building, we may have to don some kind of disguise, and I wouldn't say disguise, but change do what we call a character change. Maybe I'm playing the role of a person in the cleaning crew. And this is where social engineering may and usually likely happens. I'd say probably a good number of the infiltrations that we've done, that my team has done, we don't always have the privilege of knowing if that facility, office, warehouse is going to be occupied. So this means that we need to be prepared. And to be prepared, we might want to develop some sort of pretext ahead of time that in the event that we do come across somebody walking down the hallway, that we have some sort of pretext established. That means that we have clothes that matches our pretext. For example, if we're playing a late night cleaning crew person, we want to have we don't want to be wearing all black clothing. We want to have something that looks the part. Okay. Additionally, what's very important about this step, penetrate and control, is movement inside the building. This aspect is a far and vast. There's a lot of discussion around this one, and I do get more into that in some of my training. But movement inside the facility, depending upon its environment, are all the lights off? Don't turn any lights on if the lights are off, unless you're really certain about the environment. And just, especially if you don't know if it's going to be occupied. So there's a lot to talk about there that we won't have time to get into, but movement inside the building is one of the main areas of the penetrate and control phase as well. The next one, number 10, we're getting close to the end here, is secure op ord. Secure op ord means just securing the operational orders. This is where it's the very critical to the operation. All right. So we've done all these things. We've discovered vulnerabilities during our recon. We've built the tools or acquired tools, the team. We've mobilized to the location. We set up. We determine, are the vulnerabilities still there? Yes, they are. We're going to continue. We're maneuvering the team all the way to the physical security control. We've exploited it. We've gotten inside. We're making our way around. What did we really come there to do? Okay. Oftentimes, this involves, in the physical red teaming world, this involves acquiring a flag. And if you come from the pen testing background, you understand what a flag is. There's all sorts of competitions out there that are called Capture the Flag. I never played this game when I was young, but I understand that it's also a game, like a game that kids play and what have you. I never had the opportunity, but what it really means is you make your way and try to get through the facility and acquire a flag. A flag could be any object, but really what it serves to do is prove to your stakeholders or to your client that you're able to make your way into the facility by exploiting the vulnerabilities you had discovered, using doing what a likely bad actor would do, using the same level of sophistication a likely bad actor would be using, and you acquired a flag. Sometimes this is just an object like maybe it's a paperweight. Sometimes it's more telling, right? Sometimes it's a drive. Sometimes it could be even a laptop or a server. In some cases, for us, trying to bring out a blade server, which is kind of not an easy thing to do. It's just something that your stakeholders and or your clients may have want you to acquire, and see if you can exfiltrate that all the way outside the building. Different organizations have different concerns: theft of physical assets, theft of intellectual property, which is very big, and that just serves as symbolically as a way to kind of prove that is capable, that it's possible to do that. Okay, so that's secure operational orders, secure op ord, number 10. Moving on to number 11, we got one more left. Number 11 is, we've secured operational orders. We've acquired a flag of some kind. This becomes the time where we try to make our way out, right? So this means we're doing in more of an orderly evacuation from the target. We may be exiting in a different way that we made our entry. This tends to happen. In fact, this tends to happen if the facility is more like a campus or a really large geographical footprint. So we may be exiting different ways. We may be encountering different security controls upon our exit that we need to take into account. Maybe they were different from what we came in. We need to cover our tracks. What do I mean by that? I don't actually mean that we're hiding our footprints. At least my team hasn't done that yet. But what we really mean by covering tracks is while we're looking for that flag, and that flag could really be anywhere. It could be in the receptionist desk. It could be inside a server room. It could be inside someone's office. While we're looking for that, if it's something big, clearly we don't have to look around for things. But If it happens to be something like a removable drive in the CEO's office, we may have to, we're going to be opening the door. Perhaps we're going to be moving a chair around. What we want to do is make sure we don't leave a tell. We don't want to leave any tracks that anyone's been there. We don't want to move monitors. We don't want to move, keyboards, so to speak. We don't want to move around anything that the phones, for example. We don't want to leave a tell. We don't leave a trace that someone's been there, right? So when we say covering tracks, that's predominantly what we mean. Then finally, we want to start thinking about moving to the rally point, right? So earlier I kind of talked about what is rally point. I talked about the staging location where we set up, the deployment point where we actually, maybe we get dropped off by the red team leader. And the other, so the last one here is the rally point. So this is the place where we are going to meet. We're maybe 2 or 3 or 4 strong as a team. Perhaps we've split up. More than likely we have. So we're all through the building or buildings. And as we're communicating, with the red team leader, he or she gives us the signal to kind of make our way to the rally point. The rally point is usually where he or she is parked. The red team leader has a vehicle somewhere, perhaps, or maybe it's just a physical location that we're going to be meeting at. But that rally point is crucial to the successful completion of a physical red team operation. And while this may differ, for me, in my team, in my experience doing this for many, many years, is that usually our clients and our stakeholders don't consider an operation to be fully executed until we've made our way cleanly in and out of a location. So kind of running through the full gamut of things, even, we may be successful at step 11 by acquiring the target. But as I said before, making a clean exit means that we evade security controls on our way out, successfully, rallying at the rally point. So that's a very critical component of that as well. All right, last step, collect and exfiltrate. So upon getting ready to leave the location, once we're inside the CEO's office, we've carried out a number of exploits on the vulnerabilities. Generally, there are several that we tend to have to exploit to get to reach a flag. We've done all those things. Maybe we've picked a lock. Maybe we've used a few tools, maybe the under the door tool. Maybe we've shimmed a door. Maybe we've done XYZ in such a way that we've had to use tools. So at this point in time, we want to make sure that we don't leave any tools behind. Now, I'm guilty of this, unfortunately, but it's critical to, especially if you have multiple locations where you're doing 5, and one in one particular engagement, there were a number of them, somewhere around 10, maybe a little under 10, but I happened to drop my my shove it tool on the ground. Now, thankfully, this location wasn't one that was visited regularly. It happened to be a power substation. And those aren't like offices where people are, there's multiple people showing up 9 to 5, right? This is one of those things where it's not occupied all the time. So thankfully, that it wasn't a more obvious situation, but I could have really thrown the entire engagement if someone had seen, hey, what does this thing look like? It looks like a Slim Jim, right? Very similar to a Slim Jim that you would use to break into a car. Just a little bit shorter, and someone, a line person could have seen that and said, hey, what's this? It looks like a Slim Jim. Is somebody trying to break in? Hey, I'm going to call corporate, or going to call the headquarters and say, something's fishy was going on here, and then they put everyone else on alert, and we're halfway through our engagement, and we've got 5 other places to go to. Suddenly, you have this heightened level of awareness, and it's not an accurate test, right? We want to make sure that we're testing under normal circumstances, and this wouldn't be a normal circumstance. So collecting tools, make sure you have them with you is very important before you leave. Making sure you don't leave a tell, right? So this is very important. Making sure you have your flags with you somewhere secured. If it's a drive and you have a backpack or something with you, or a satchel of some kind, making sure you secure that in the satchel before you leave. And then it's exit to the rally point. All the team members sort of make their way and exfil to the designated area. And usually this is usually where the red team leader is situated. And, you make your way out there, again, trying to avoid those security controls that may be different from your entrance, right? You may be exiting out to a different exit within the facility. And this may require you to encounter, avoid, bypass different security controls that you happen to encounter on your entrance. And the key thing here is to do your exfiltration in an orderly manner. I always like to say, I guess, thinking about the episode 3, where I, talked a little bit about one of the war stories that I had in social engineering. One of the things that is natural is that once you've done something bad, that you have this natural instinct to want to leave, to get the heck out of there. And I talk a little bit about that. I kind of mentioned it in episode 3. Whenever I'm holding a flag, especially when there's people around me, I get nervous. And this is natural. It happens to everybody. Imagine a thief inside a convenience store. He or she happens to steal something. That person isn't walking. That person isn't thinking cool, calm, and collective. Though they may look like it, they're acting. I don't think anyone really feels no change in their body, in their mind, once they've done something they know is wrong. And even though this is a test, and we're not technically doing anything illegal, it still feels wrong. So we have this natural tendency to want to get the heck out of there and do it in a disorderly fashion. We really have to fight that. We want to make sure that we're not just, looks like there's a straightaway and I'm just going to book it. That's usually not the right thing to do. You want to make sure you do it in an orderly fashion such that you don't somehow compromise the mission as a whole just by feeling like you've got to get the heck out of there, right? So it's certainly when you experience it, you'll know, hey, I just want to get to the rally point because we're almost done, and you're still amped up on adrenaline, but you really have to fight that and doing it in a very orderly fashion. So again, one of the main aspects of collect and exfiltrate is to get to the rally point undiscovered, unscathed, with your tools and any flags that you happen to acquire. And this usually amounts to the full completion and the conclusion of the mission as a whole, the actual operation itself. So thank you for taking the time to listen in today. I know we ran a little bit long, but if you did enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues. Until next week, I hope you have a great day.